Welcome to Crimes and Mysteries. Today we're going to delve into the story of one of the most notorious killers in the United States. The Boston Strangler. Between 1962 and 1964, 13 women were brutally murdered in Boston, and to this day the case continues to generate debate and doubts. Who was really the Boston Strangler? Was Albert DeSalvo solely responsible for all the deaths? Or are we facing a case of multiple killers? Between 1962 and 1964, 13 women between the ages of 19 and 85 were killed. Let's analyze the crimes in detail. The first victim was Anna E. Slessors. Anna was found in her home, strangled with the belt of her dressing gown. The crime scene showed signs of a struggle, but there was no forced entry to the door. Initially, police suspected a robbery, but the strangulation pattern was later noticed in other victims. Mary Mullen, 85 years old. Mary suffered a heart attack during a possible attack by the killer. There were no signs of strangulation, but the death was linked to the strangler due to the unusual timing and circumstances. Nina Nichols, 68, was found strangled with a sock. Her house was ransacked, suggesting a robbery. She showed signs of sexual violence. The fourth victim, Helen Blake, 65 years old. She was strangled with her own socks. The body was found partially naked, with signs of sexual assault. The similarity in modus operandi suggested a connection with the other cases. Victim number 5 was 75-year-old Ida Egra, found strangled with a pillow pressed against her face. The body was positioned oddly, suggesting the killer manipulated the crime scene after death. Jane Sullivan, 67, was the sixth victim found on her knees with her head submerged in a sink. She had been strangled with a piece of cloth. Her death was only discovered days later due to the smell. After the first 6 victims, who were all middle-aged or elderly, the killer began to attack younger women, suggesting a change in the pattern. Victim number 7, Sophie Clark, 20 years old. Sophie was a college student who was strangled with her own socks. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, indicating that she may have let the killer in. Signs of sexual assault were found. Patricia Bissett, 23, was victim number 8, strangled with a cord. The body was found in bed, partially undressed. The crime scene appeared more controlled, suggesting an experienced killer. Mary Brown, 69, victim number 9, was strangled with her socks. The house showed signs of robbery, but the murder was linked to the strangler due to the method used. Victim 10, Beverly Sammons, 23. Found strangled with a scarf and stabbed several times. Unlike other victims, there were no clear signs of sexual assault. The violence of the crime suggested anger or desperation on the part of the killer. Evelyn Corbin, 58, was victim number 11. Strangled with her own socks, her body was partially naked, with signs of sexual assault. The killer consumed food at the crime scene, leaving clues such as glasses and cutlery with fingerprints. Joanne Graff, 23, was victim number 12, strangled with a pantyhose. The body was found in suggestive positions, indicating that the killer manipulated the scene after the crime. The absence of signs of a struggle suggested that the killer was known or that the victim was caught by surprise. The last victim, 19-year-old Mary Sullivan. Mary was strangled with a scarf. The crime scene was one of the most violent, with clear signs of sexual assault. Decades later, DNA found at the scene linked Albert DeSalvo to the crime. Modus operandi. The victims' ages ranged from 19 to 85, indicating a significant change in profile over the course of the murders. The strangulation method uses the victim's personal objects, such as socks, scarves, or belts. The locations, the victims' homes, showed no signs of forced entry, which suggests that the killer was invited to enter or knew how to infiltrate. Sexual violence is present in many, but not all, crime scenes, which reinforces the multiple perpetrator theory. The beginning of the investigation, the first deaths, the case began with the murder of Anna E. Slessors on June 14, 1962. At first the police considered the case a robbery, followed by homicide. Only when the deaths piled up and patterns began to emerge did police realize they were facing a possible serial killer. Recognizing the pattern, the victims were predominantly women, ranging from elderly to middle-aged, and all were found in their homes. Strangled with personal objects. The lack of signs of forced entry suggested that the killer was able to convince victims to let him in, possibly using charm or convincing pretexts. Difficulties in the investigation. Firstly, there was the lack of resources and technology. In the 1960s, police did not have access to modern tools such as DNA testing or centralized fingerprint databases. Without advanced technology, suspect identification relied on witnesses, confessions, and rudimentary forensic standards. Contaminated crime scene. Some crime scenes were contaminated by police or onlookers, compromising important evidence. The lack of specialized training to deal with serial killings was a significant obstacle. Seemingly unrelated crimes. The interval between the murders and the change in the profile of the victims from older to younger women confused investigators who initially believed they were dealing with more than one criminal. The media impact and media coverage was intense. Murders quickly gained local and national media attention. Newspapers dubbed the killer the Boston Strangler, and sensational headlines fueled public panic. Boston police faced immense pressure to capture the perpetrator, leading to rushed investigations and some mistaken arrests. Mass hysteria also resulted in a series of false reports of strangulation and suspects. Police interviewed hundreds of people, including acquaintances of the victims, neighbors, and individuals with a history of sexual crimes. Suspects were questioned, but no concrete links were established with the murders. Investigators began profiling the victims to understand the killer's modus operandi. The lack of signs of forced entry led to the theory that the killer could be someone the victims trusted or who used a very convincing pretext to enter the victims' homes. Boston police collaborated with neighboring departments and the FBI, which began applying rudimentary criminal profiling techniques. Advances and breaks in the investigation. In 1964, DeSalvo was arrested for a series of sexual crimes known as the Measuring Man case. During his imprisonment, he confessed to the Boston Strangler murders, but the confession generated controversy. We will talk about this confession later. Some of the murders attributed to the Boston Strangler had striking differences in modus operandi, suggesting that they could have been committed by someone else. Investigators reviewed other homicide cases in the area to determine if they could be related. Crucial evidence and problems. Personal items used in the strangulation were recovered from the crime scenes, but they contained no usable fingerprints. Fibers and other traces were analyzed, but the technology of the time did not allow for precise comparisons. Although DeSalvo confessed, he got important details about some of the crimes wrong, and this has led to doubts about the veracity of his confession and whether he was really the Boston Strangler. After DeSalvo's confession, Boston police considered the case solved but did not formally charge him with the murders. He was convicted of lesser crimes and sent to prison, where he was murdered in 1973. In 2013, advances in DNA linked DeSalvo to the murder of Mary Sullivan, the last known victim. However, there is no concrete evidence linking him to any of the other murders, leaving open the possibility that more than one person may have been responsible. Now let's look in more detail at Albert DeSalvo's confession. Albert DeSalvo confessed to being the Boston Strangler while in prison for a series of home invasions and sex crimes. These crimes had not been linked to the Strangler murders. DeSalvo was known as the Measuring Man. He pretended to be a measurement services employee to enter women's homes. During these visits, he would sexually harass or abuse them. This pattern of behavior reinforced suspicion that he might be the Boston Strangler. DeSalvo was not initially a suspect in the Boston Strangler murders. However, while in prison, he confided about the crimes to another prisoner, George Nassar. Nassar reported the confession to his attorney, F. Lee Bailey, who later ended up representing DeSalvo. DeSalvo provided detailed information about the murders, including the victims' appearance and habits. He described the women's characteristics and the layout of their homes, the method of the crimes including the use of the victims' personal items such as belts or socks for strangulation, graphic details of the attacks, how he allegedly entered the homes and what he did before killing them. Although DeSalvo knew some details accurately, he erred in others, for example, incorrectly describing the color of a crime scene carpet. Nor did he know critical details that only the killer would know. Some believe DeSalvo confessed to gain notoriety. He would have thought that being identified as the Boston Strangler would guarantee prosperity and money for his family. At the time, no forensic evidence directly linked DeSalvo to the crimes. The police never found a witness that placed him near the victims. Many have speculated that the details DeSalvo provided in his confession were known by the general public due to the immense media coverage of the case. Albert DeSalvo was convicted only of the crimes related to the Mediator Man and sent to prison. In 1973, he was murdered by another prisoner under mysterious circumstances. This ended the possibility of further confessions or clarifications about the crimes. If Albert DeSalvo wasn't the Boston Strangler, who was? Let's explore the main theories. The first theory we suggest is that of multiple killers. The lack of consistency in victim profiles and methods suggests that the crimes may have been committed by multiple people. Some experts believe that the real killer used the crime spree to cover up his own actions and that Albert DeSalvo committed a few crimes within the Boston Strangler spree. The second theory is that Albert DeSalvo was the sole killer. Despite a lack of physical evidence linking him to crimes other than Mary Sullivan, DeSalvo's detailed confession convinced many that he alone was to blame. His death in prison in 1973 ended the possibility of DeSalvo's connection to a single crime does not prove that he was responsible for all the other murders, especially since the modus operandi was not unique, nor was the profile of the victims. There are still doubts about the veracity of his confession and the involvement of other possible suspects. The Boston Strangler murders remain an open case as Albert DeSalvo and no other suspects have been formally charged. Therefore, the Boston Strangler case remains a mystery. Although Albert DeSalvo confessed, evidence suggests that he may not have acted alone or may not have even been the real Boston Strangler. What really happened between 1962 and 1964? This mystery, like so many others, continues to challenge our understanding of human behavior. Keep coming back to our channel and remember, every mystery has a story, but not always an answer.